Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and the chattering teacup sends her regards. I told you before, dear listeners, she is trying to let the new additions to our management learn the ropes. Very, very important part. But here with me, an author, screenwriter from across the pond, Joseph Rein. Hello, Joseph, and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And I said before I started the recording, your book, Youtopia, and it is spelled like the personal pronoun you. It came out in April 2024.
Correct.
Yes. Is quite disturbing. To say
I take that as a
least.
compliment.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely disturbing in a good kind of way. Be assured about that. And I enjoyed reading it. Like I said, a little bit creepy, a little bit disturbing in a good kind of way. Let's be glad that it is fiction. Let's hope it is fiction. But Joseph, what can you tell our listeners before we dive deeper into your book about the plot? Without giving too much away, of course.
Yes, of course. Yes. So, as you alluded to, Utopia, the concept of it, I came up with it quite a long time ago, actually, just sort of an idea, and it was part of a different work. And they were just sort of talking about what it would mean to live in a perfect world and how, my perfection and your perfection and everyone's perfection is a different thing. And so the concept behind it is that you are able to live out your perfect world within your mind. Very akin to sort of virtual reality, but on a permanent basis. And so the creepy part, I think, as you allude to, Edith, is twofold. One is that what really happens, and which is part of why I liked writing this book and this concept, is what does that really mean for us if we are going to pursue perfection but have no societal parameters or boundaries to it, right? What is our mind going to gravitate towards if it's allowed to seek its own versions of perfection? But then also plot-wise, of course, this isn't a philosophical book; it's a novel. So within this world, one of the persons, and they're called immersers. That's the title that I gave these people who live in this place in their permanent stasis. And one of the immersers is murdered, and so the book becomes my main character, Annabelle Downer. She's an FBI agent. She is called to this case to try to solve this murder, to ask who is potentially attempting to take this system down, or is it an intentional person against this one person, or is it something larger? And there are many characters presented in the book who have differing viewpoints on whether or not this is a good thing for society. As you say, is this something that we're gravitating towards? It's fiction, yes, but could this be our reality soon? If this became a reality, you would see great rifts between people and families, some deciding to do it, some not to. And one of the things that I really enjoyed exploring in this book, not only this plot of trying to figure out who is the culprit in trying to take this down, but what are the motivations people would have for or against this certain type of, futuristic society. Writing this book for me was being able to explore the different sides of who would be for, who would be against, what kind of rifts and divisions people would have within their communities, within their own families, when it comes to this big life-changing decision. A technology, and in some way just mirroring how technology moves so fast now that we can barely catch up with it. And we have people who are making, these choices that fundamentally change how they live their lives. And some people are just adamantly against it, saying, no, you can't do this. And so the murder mystery aspect of the story was really exploring who would take it to that extreme to say, right, we need to sort of purge society of something like this.
And there was also this interesting character. I hope I'm not giving too much away when I mention him, Terence Martin.
Yeah.
And his story was quite intriguing because he came from a point in life where you would have understand his decision to immerse himself. But then in the end, he realized, is it really life?
Yeah.
Living in your own mind?
Yeah, he was actually, I'm glad you pointed him out, because you might be able to tell he was one of my favorite characters to write, just because he started with that question of like, who would be taken to the point of wanting to do this thing. And he was sort of suicidal, and he was thinking, this is the only route I have to take. And then he has this moment that makes him realize or understand that actually going and living in his own mind wouldn't create for him, like you said, his idea of living is not just pure self-fulfillment. I called it, I believe in the books, like the all thumbs existence. And I was thinking of our music, where we constantly say, yes, I like this. And so then the technology says, oh, you like that? Here's 10 more of it. And it pours upon us this sort of like tunneling personality trait, where we then only listen to, or we only eat, or we only experience things that we believe, at least at the time, this is what I really like and enjoy. And for me, it was a way to sort of exercise what I try not to do in my own life, is to go to a restaurant and say, I'm going to get the same thing every time, because that's what I love and that's what I know. It changes all the time, right? And one of the beautiful things about being human is our mutability and our ability to grow and change and find, like, I didn't used to like olives, and now I eat olives every day, right? Because it's a different, I've changed, or they've changed, or something. And so Terrence was a character who took that to the extreme. And so he also in the book heads sort of an anti-utopia religion called real life.
Yep.
And so he is leading this sort of crusade against the idea of existence being only being only those things that your mind will sort of believe inherently. I like that, and therefore that I want more and more and more and more of that one thing.
And also the founder of Utopia, Sonia Young.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, at the beginning of the book, she right from the start, she seems to me like a bit of a sinister character. On the one hand, on the other hand, there is also, like you said before, there's also her strive for perfection, a little bit like the Borg. Perfection. We need to reach perfection. We can only reach perfection if we assimilate. In this case, find the perfect mind, maybe in her vision.
Yeah, she's very idealist in that way, right? I studied utopias in college, and I was really fascinated just by authors who really took it to heart, right? Who really thought to themselves, we can find ways to make humanity and society perfect. And so she was sort of modeled on people who have these very lofty and idealistic goals. And she's brilliant, and she's rich, and so she's able to eccentric, right? And so she's able to sort of pursue these things. I think the sinister part that you talk about it is in part something that I grapple with too, because when I look at that, so many of us, and me in particular, think of things like Nazi Germany and the idea of perfecting humanity and how scary that can really be, right? And so I think Sonia is in part purely looking for the ideal and believing in like humanity and it can reach its goals. And for her, reaching humanity's goals is a singular affair, right? Like that's her sort of take on it is we can't, as a society, agree um, as to what it is that will be best for everyone. Therefore, let's make it an individual endeavor in our minds because that is achievable. And so that's where she sort of pursues it. And I think that that sinister aspect of it is in some ways just inherent in the idea of being perfect. It's almost it's impossible to think about perfection in that way without thinking about the harm that might come to other people or people who aren't interested in your point of view or those types of things.
Well, there's this part of people who seek perfection, but there's also these people who seek to rid themselves of the trauma they've experienced.
Yeah.
And that's something I've talked about to other authors. But if you do not experience loss and so on, how will you grow as a person?
Yeah. It's in Utopia, and that's how Utopia is presented sort of by Terrence Martin and some of the characters in the book is the easy way out, right?
Yeah.
If we can enter a world where our pets never die, where we don't lose loved ones, where we aren't facing difficult decisions because everything is given to us or is answered in a sort of yes. What do we become? And I think humans have a base impulse to go towards things that reward us, right? That oh, we did this and it worked out, therefore I will do it again, right? And there are times in life where that's not going to happen. You're going to have to experience those things. And how do you deal with that when things go wrong? Or as you say, when you experience a loss? We've all lost. And so that part of your character that gets shaped by those, if you lose that, are we really human in that sense? Probably not.
But also your FBI agent, when we learn about her past, there's also trauma, there's loss. And at one point, I think she was tempted by the promises of Utopia.
Yeah, for sure. And that was important for me too. So she, and this is fairly early in the book, so I'm not spoiling anything, I think, but she lost a child when child was 4, almost 5 years old. And when that happened and you're presented with the idea that if you went into this world in Utopia, you would no longer need to feel that pain, that lasting pain. Because trauma and loss it's not something that goes away. It's something that you live with for the rest of your life to varying degrees. And so she is tempted by it. She asks people, she's investigating it, but she asks almost everyone she investigates, have you considered it? And I think she seeks out those questions and those answers. And she's asking people basically, why not? Right? Why aren't we just escaping into our own worlds? What's keeping you here in the real world? And she's looking for that answer for herself too, to see like this, even though there's pain, what we're doing here is worthwhile. It's worth fighting for. It's worth being a part of. And so I think all of us, when we're dealing with those different griefs and traumas, feel that way, wondering like, how are other people dealing with this, and what motivates them to continue on.
Yeah, you said when I mentioned Sonia at the beginning that I got the impression that she's not only idealistic, but also in a way sinister in reaching her goals. Because her strive for perfection goes too far. Mm-hmm. She has the ability to go that far. Nobody is obviously able to stop her from making her idea real, making it happen. And I got the impression that she's not all about philanthropic goals and
Right.
so on.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, part of that too early on for her is gaining public acceptance, right? She certainly, as many people, she's supposed to be presented as a model of like the larger tech guru types, right? Your Zuckerbergs and Bezos, right? And they all have God complexes, right? They all believe that what it is that they're doing, right, is the best thing for the world and to bring it in. And in a lot of ways, it's probably very similar to things like Facebook, or that came onto the scene and then all of a sudden were prolific. And it was because certain people saw aspects of it and said, this is a good thing. Hey, look, I can contact my family at any time, or I can see pictures, and they see all of these positives of it. For Sonia, that was getting the right people to sort of endorse it and be on board with it so that everyone would accept it. But yes, she's certainly of the mindset that she knows what's best for the world. And her creation is the thing that can save humanity from itself. And of course, the people who are fighting against it, right, are the people who are saying, essentially, let's pump the brakes on this and let's talk about the ways in which this isn't a good thing.
Yeah, because life is change, isn't it? And like you mentioned before, this constant loop of always the same perfect moments in your life, or what you imagine would have been the perfect moment in life. It sounds like Terence also said a bit, dull. And that's not what life is all about. Change, also coping with loss, trauma. Yeah. You can grow as a person if you have experienced it. Probably. That's way how life works. I was wondering, because I spoke with the teacup about your book, and I said a part of it, the idea of this immersing yourself in this sort of, she calls it nests. It is a bit like, it feels a bit like Matrix, although Matrix wasn't voluntary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a teeny tiny bit, it reminded me of Fahrenheit.
Oh,
because
right.
when you have this mentioning of when our main character comes home and his wife is in the living room and there are these 3 walls, these video walls, and she immersed herself in a virtual reality, not of her own making, not of her own mind, but brought from somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, those are definite influences. The Matrix, and another movie, Vanilla Sky, was a movie, both versions of that, where you're living in this dream state, but it turns into a nightmare kind of thing. But then also Fahrenheit and 1984, and just the idea of video ubiquity. And in the book, the characters, how Anna investigates what's going on in the immerser's minds is she does stand, as you said, in my version, it's just a large concave screen, but it's very similar that you're supposed to be like stepping into somebody's experience and world. And movies have been trying to do this, right? Trying to get you to leave your body and be so ensconced that you forget where you are. And that technology is sort of asking, like, okay, can we exist somewhere and really feel? In this case, she has to experience murder, and she has to experience these very intense moments where the sound of somebody's voice sounds like it's coming from your own body. Some of that was the coolest to write, because it is sci-fi, right? I'm not really a sci-fi writer, or at least I don't feel that way necessarily. But it is a sci-fi concept, right? So you have to write into the concept itself. And so that's what I was pulling, just those sort of very visual, very sort of movie-esque feel to get that sort of that immersion to it. And it probably ultimately wasn't it was probably very much a comment and critique on just people doing the same with their phones, right? Like just sort of like diving into it and not existing, right? In the world, because they're existing here, right? When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you do, right? And you go somewhere else. And so I think part of it was just sort of a comment on how quickly we go there, and how living there and living here it's going to be a choice, right? We're going to have to make that decision at some point, what we want to do. And I think the book in some ways isn't an argument for one or the other. The book is just an expression of like, what are the consequences of those things?
Immersing yourself in a virtual reality, that's what children often do when they sit in front of a computer and play their games, their video games. And it's always fascinating to watch them. I mean, even my students, when they play together, they don't really play together like we did. You know what I mean? They sit in front, 5 people sit in front of their computers. They have a headset on, and they're playing on the computer with each other, supposedly, and that's it. They do not play cards or anything else. They just sit in front of their computer. They even don't look left or right, because they have to concentrate on the monitor. And I think it's sad, because come on, people.
And what if you never stepped out, right? What if you never stopped doing that is a question, right? And and so much of that too, I think, to go back to your point about loss in human nature, and the things that sort of that happen here in real life that don't necessarily there. I look at it as a sort of a slippery slope. And this goes back to the creepy aspect of it, is that video games reward certain things, right? And the more you do that, the more you get rewarded. And I think in our minds that probably could happen. There are characters in this book who go to beaches a lot, right? Or one that goes to a concert every week, and it's very similar and it's very familiar. And that's sort of part of the perfect world. But I think boredom, for humans, right? We would find ways to entertain ourselves. And if we don't have somebody there telling us no, or we don't have consequences to our actions, that can be a very slippery slope as to what our brain might find as entertainment, and what we might end up doing if we're allowed to. So one aspect of the book is that Youtopia is seen as a sort of a kinder form of incarceration. So if we take criminals who engage in criminal behavior and put them in their own mind, in their own world, they can go wild, and it doesn't matter, because they're not really hurting anybody. But are criminals the only people who that would happen to, right? Or would this sort of slippery slope thing, might our brain go towards extremes no matter what? The book takes place in a span of 10 years from when the first person is immersed to sort of the present day. So that question, right, has to be sort of left open. It's not, people haven't lived there for centuries, right, or anything like that. So, but it is a question that I'm interested in, that idea of, like you say, if we're in those video games for so long and we live that, like, what does that do as far as what it is we want to do, or how we enjoy ourselves, really, how we entertain ourselves outside of that.
Absolutely. And when does when does Utopia become dystopia?
Yeah. I think because it's a novel, fairly quick, right?
Absolutely.
As it has to, right? Yeah.
I mean, there's always the question these days. I wonder if we have more interest or more pleasure in reading dystopian books than utopian books. Or I get the impression.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's an inherent cynicism, in that that's not necessarily new, but it also, I think, sort of comes in waves. And so, like in the 90s, there was a lot of that sort of, blasé attitude towards things. And I think recently, I mean, the way the things we're looking at in the world sort of force us into this. We have climate change. We have forces that are outside of our control that sort of say, like, oh man, like the world is kind of
heat waves, right? Torrential rain. It had been torrential rains where we live, just nonstop, and floodings and things. And so when you have all of that, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine a place where the utopia, or heaven, or a better place, could exist here in this world. Sonia Young, as a person who says we can achieve this sort of thing, gets inherent skepticism, gets inherently somebody saying, come on, really? And I think that, that's part of the culture that we're sort of baked into. And post-apocalyptic literature goes into that, right? Like people thinking the after, right? Like what happens after the big event, whatever the big event might be. That's very popular, and that's in part of that all plays into dystopian, those sorts of thinking about what the world might, might devolve into, because I think it is on our minds, right? Even if it's on the back of our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing your book triggered in me, or something I read about Canada, you probably know this program they have, this MAID program, this Medical Assistance in Dying program. There's also something which came to mind when I read your book. The intention or the idea behind that program was well meant. But when you look how it changed over the past few years, and what they did stop is having mental health problems, and you would be able to apply for that. That has been stopped until, I think, 2027. That's also something. I mean, the intention for people who have a terminal illness, understandable and laudable, but where does it end?
Right. And that's, in the character in the book who it's alluding to here is a young boy named Oscar, and his mother writes this sort of passionate diatribe against people who are saying she's wrong for putting her terminally ill son into Utopia, even though he wouldn't have to live. The idea, and it's probably a bit of a stretch, but the idea that pain is in the mind, so therefore pain would be eradicated. You could live at least the rest of your life, however long that would be, without pain. Who can begrudge somebody that, right? Who can come and say, and say, I know better than you what your life should be. But as you say, right, there, where's the line? How does it get drawn? And who is accepted and who is not accepted? And actually, the sequel to Utopia, which is titled Utopia Reborn, that's going to be out in November, and that does grapple, that does grapple even more with that question of the have and have-nots. In Utopia, the first book, it is sort of on the upswing. And so the one of the main catalysts for the book is that the U.S. Senate has passed this bill that is going to allow healthcare to cover Utopia, which would mean that more and more people are able to access it, and it's no longer cost prohibitive, but it's covered by healthcare for the very reasons, right, that Canada and places are trying to help people who are in pain, mental pain, physical pain, otherwise. But then, of course, that the person who is trying to stop it, other people are sort of stepping in and saying, right, like, is this the way? Is this the right path for us to do this? And it does take time to make those decisions. And it's almost inevitable that some people are going to feel left out, or some people are going to sort of sneak in or be included who shouldn't be included in all those like logistical problems that make them stop and make people say, no, we can't do this. Let's revisit it. Let's think about it. And then change just comes so slowly in that sense.
May I ask if you chose the sci-fi genre because it opens so many possibilities for you to write about those difficult topics?
I think so. Yeah. And the concept came first. And whenever a concept comes to me to mind, I always try to honor like what the concept works best in. And so if it's a family drama, right, you can write that in sort of or historical in this sense, because the concept was slightly futuristic in its mind. It's like, okay, we need to write a sci-fi. But what sci-fi, what the sci-fi I love, Philip Dick and Asimov, sort of your classic sci-fis, but even contemporary sci-fi, Ursula Le Guin is so good. Those are able to take whatever worlds, and sometimes they're in a different world. Utopia is in our world, and it's actually set. I intentionally set it in contemporary time, so it's set in 2004, but a sort of left of center version of that. And because it allows you to sort of explore, okay, here's where the world is, here's what the world could be. Our current world isn't necessarily a natural thing, or the laws we have or the consequences we have aren't necessarily like human natural. And I think sci-fi really allows you to take the world as it is and just shift it just enough. And in that way, it's like a funhouse mirror, right? It's showing you things, but it's showing you enlarged versions of certain things. And then other things are shrunk, and it allows you that sort of elasticity. And that makes it fun to write. It makes it hopefully fun to read. Of course, the story and the characters have to be there. They have to be interesting. You have to want to follow them. But as a writer too, I want people coming away from the book, and people have said this to me, and it probably feels like one of the highest compliments I've gotten about the book is it made me think about what my perfect life would be, or who would be included, or why. And it makes them take that concept and apply it to the world today. And I think that's part of what I strive for as a writer, is for them to walk away with those questions.
There's also another question about the victim. We haven't mentioned the first victim of the crime yet. And I wonder about his motivations, because there has been no obvious trauma, no obvious loss. There is no obvious illness. And yet he decides to immerse himself. And what we learn about him, or his way of creating his perfect moments, his perfect world, is disturbing. You mentioned a little bit about that before. And maybe this was his motivation to make that happen? Like you said, what motivates people to immerse themselves?
Yeah, and as a murder mystery, that had to be one of the big questions. As to he was one of the originals who went in, so he had been in for a very long time. His name was Charles Fowler, and in looking back into both his life beforehand, so Anna goes on this investigation to try to figure out who he was before he went in. She interviews his former wife, and she. Of course, as characters can, and as characters should in a mystery, they obfuscate, or the lines are blurred, and she sort of says, "I'm not exactly sure why he did it. Just one day, he sort of he was toying with the idea, and he kind of liked being a trailblazer, but all of a sudden he kind of was up and gone." And she's trying to piece together this life of 10 years ago. And part of that is a futile effort, because, as I say, when I think about 10 years ago, if you ask me somebody who I haven't seen in 10 years, what were they like? My recollections are going to be hazy at best. And so then she dives into the life that he created in his own mind. And that's where she starts to get into some of the seedier, the more like, oh, this was something that he might have been able to do there that he couldn't do in real life. And getting to that motivation as to why somebody might want to murder him, maybe based on that, on that life that he had hoped to lead. And did he actually lead that? And was this him, or is this just a something that happens to his mind after 10 years of free floating.
Yeah.
All of those questions sort of get jumbled and tossed into the air as she tries to figure that out.
Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating. Also, the fact that in your book it is possible, like you said, to walk into those minds, so to speak,
Yeah.
and to make a recording of people's minds and projections, whatever we might call them, what they created, what their mind created. That's also a fascinating part in your book.
Thank you. Yeah, it was offered in part. I was thinking, right, or why Sonia would offer it, right? Like I knew why it was good for the book because it allowed Anna to see and to visualize and etc. But it had to have a reason as to being, right, for Sonia and for the book.
Yeah.
And so it's offered as a sort of a quality control, right? Like we're not just taking your loved ones and sending them off into these nests where they live in suspension and they're in their own minds and you can't know anything about it because then you might sort of, did they harvest their organs? Did they, like what happened to them? Right.
Yeah.
So that it's offered as a sort of like, you can choose somebody who gets to come and watch and see, oh, they are truly living the life that they want to live. And of course, as the book goes on, we recognize that investigating them and watching them, that, would you really want to see that? Would you want to see the inner workings of your spouse's mind, unfettered mind? Because our minds aren't reality, right? I always say we have voices to filter out the thoughts that we don't need to say, because not all our thoughts are good ones. And our thoughts can surprise us, and our thoughts can be sinister, or they can be very altruistic. And if you watch that, is similar to sort of stories that deal with mind reading, right? And you want to hear everybody's thoughts. You're probably not going to like everything you see. And so is this a good thing or not?
Probably not. I'm not sure I want to hear and see everyone's thoughts. No, thank you very much. And there's also, you mentioned it before, Oscar, the child who was terminally ill. And for Sonia, his idea of the world he created, it's the perfect world. I wonder, it's pure, it's childlike, it's perfect, but maybe it's a misconception. Because coming to think of a book like Lord of the Flies.
Yeah.
Is it really that perfect and pure?
Right. And I certainly don't agree with Sonia on that front. And it's part of, and I should say the second book does get into this a lot. It's titled Utopia Reborn. So it's a lot about children, right? But the idealization of youth, or the idea that, young people are sort of blank canvases that if they're given the right direction, or at least given their own, they will flourish. And that is some form of perfection. We look at children and we think so innocent, and we think so right. Everything that we sort of put onto kids. And then you see my sons tearing each other apart, and you say, "Really? These are the angels that we're talking about." And so Sonia really does look at Oscar as an ideal for her experiment, for the idea of utopia, because, as she says, right, like adulthood to some degree can be the thing that taints us. That's her understanding of it. And one of the things about making her sinister, that character a little bit sinister in the book, is so that, readers don't read it and go, oh, this is what the author thinks, right? It's
Yeah.
important for the book not to preach certain things, right? For you to read that
Yeah.
and look at it and be like, well, really though?
Yeah, exactly. And children or young adults, they often have a black and white worldview. There's no gray in their world. Everything is
Yeah.
extreme. And I think she forgets about that.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea of sort of right or wrong, and
Yeah.
what you're doing here is
Yeah.
wrong, or this is right, and how quickly those things can sort of be switched or flip-flopped or based on something arbitrary or something they're told. Yeah.
Yeah, the complexity of life isn't something children or young adults consider.
Right.
And how and why should they? Because they have to learn. And like you said, youth is wasted on the young, isn't it?
It is. That is true. I remember that every day when I get out of bed and I kind of go, oh boy, like maybe Utopia wouldn't be so bad. I wouldn't feel like that.
Yeah. I agree with you there. And Joseph, your advice for authors, be it the sci-fi genre or any other genre, or just in general, what would it be?
That's a great question. Yeah. I think I don't live and die by quotes, but I also really think the quote, and I can't attribute this to anyone necessarily, but it might have been Toni Morrison. I can't remember. Somebody said, write the book you want to read, something to that degree, right? I think you as a writer need to be entertained and engaged in what you're writing. You can't write what you think somebody else will like, or what you believe will be good. You're never going to get to the finish line. And so for me, one of the things is I have to really enjoy and engage in this case, the concept, characters. I have to read it back and go like, I like this.
Yeah.
This is good. This is something I would pick up off the shelves. And so that would be one thing. Number two, I would say is, I guess, and I teach writing, so I talk about this stuff all the time. But one of the things that I think contemporary writing allows that is a bit of a problem is the ability to write, edit, delete all at once. Word processors can be such a good thing, but when I started, I was very young when I started on a typewriter. That technology was going out as I started on that. But I would still, when I was younger, I would still handwrite things. And I don't do that anymore. But I also have to remind myself that it's not going to be perfect. It's not even necessarily going to be good the first time it comes out. But that doesn't mean I should go back in and delete. I have so many students, and I taught a novel writing course, and I have so many students who reached that sort of 1/3 of the way through. The romance of the novel is done. You've got a lot of it out, but now you're in that like weeds of the middle. And instead of like continuing on, instead of saying, I'm going to cut myself out of these weeds and I'm going to make it to the end, they will go back and start to try to tinker with the beginning. And it just becomes this constant cycle, and you're never done. And so I try as best I can to write out. And so my example for this in Youtopia is there was a character, Lonnie, Anna's best friend, who was not in the book at all until I was about 2/3 of the way through. And I was like, oh, she needs a friend. She had nobody in her personal life that she could kind of converse with, could bounce ideas off of, nobody who knew her outside of the work atmosphere. And I was like, I need somebody like that. But instead of going back and writing Lonnie in and then moving forward, I just picked up and I started writing Lonnie as though she existed. So if you read my first draft of the book, you would have been like, who's this Lonnie person? She came out of nowhere. But I knew that I could do it. I knew that like when I reached that end, okay, here are my revision goals and here's what I need to change. I know it, but I'm not going to do it right now. And I think one of the one of the most important lessons I learned from writing novels, and novels are such a big endeavor, is to separate those as best you can, the sort of the creation process, and then knowing the revision process and the editing process can all still be somewhat separated, even though the word processor makes it very easy to not do so.
And also immerse yourself, not in Utopia, but in books as an author.
Absolutely. Whenever I have a problem in a book that I'm writing, the way out is to read. It's not to sit at the computer and try to cram it out, because that's never going to happen. So the two things I do actually is I read, and I make sure I'm reading something. I read more than one book at a time, because if one isn't speaking to what I'm writing, I want to be able to jump. So I'm often reading 2-3 books at a time. So reading widely. Yes, you probably read more than I do too. But I also find that, if you're stuck in writer's block, or if you have something that some obstacle that's in your way that you can't puzzle out and solve, read or go walk or mow your lawn, or take a bike ride, or do something somewhat mindless, wash dishes,
and play with your cat.
Is she here?
Yes, perfect.
I stole her usual perch because it's right in front of the sunlight, right? And it's got really nice light, but now her mat is gone and she's angry with me.
Yes, life under the paw. Tell me about
it. Doing those things just sort of frees you from the pressures of the keyboard. And when you read too, my reading suggestions is always to read somewhat widely. So don't just read in your genre.
Okay.
You need to read in your genre to know what's happening.
Yeah, sure.
But if you only read your genre, you're going to inevitably fall into certain habits in that genre. Tunnel vision. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned the plans for the future. Book number 2 will be out in November.
Correct. Yeah.
Utopia Reborn.
Utopia Reborn. Yes.
Yeah.
We have a cover which hopefully we will be revealing soon. I love it. It's similar but different. It is nearly complete. So that will be coming out in November. The third installment, which is tentatively titled Utopia Infinity, I think we're going to stick with that, will be probably out in April of next year. That one needs a little work. But I'm certain I will get it there. The fun thing about sci-fi and something like this, a conceptual book, is in fun and a challenge, is that in books 2 and book 3, you can't just do that concept over again.
Yeah.
It needs to change in some way. You need to you need to shift it. You need to expand on it. You need to do something different. And so Utopia Reborn takes Utopia and it sort of channels it into a particular group of people. Utopia Infinity sort of blows it up and asks a question of, well, what happens if we were to share these spaces now? And so it's taking a similar concept, but being able to engage it in a new way. And of course, bad things are going to happen. Trouble will happen. Utopia is cursed as a company and as a place. And so it's fun just to be able to take it and explore it in a way that originally I wasn't necessarily sure I was going to. But then when a publisher said we should make this a series, as an author, you say absolutely. And then
and as a reader, you're glad about that.
Yes, absolutely. You don't have to leave the world, right?
Yeah.
My kids just finished the Hunger Games, and they're like, "Why didn't she write more?" And I said, "Well, sometimes authors want to try something new, and they're like, why?"
Yes, we do wonder that sometimes as readers. Absolutely. Yeah, splendid. It's absolutely something to look forward to. And last but not least, Joseph, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
I don't believe so, other than I really appreciate if you get a chance to read the book. One of the things authors love the most is to know what you thought of it. And so leaving any sort of review on Goodreads or Amazon or BookBub, any of those places, and just being able to see the engagement and interaction. As an author, you can spend so much time at your keyboard and in your books. And so engagement with readers, and why I appreciate this so much, Edith, this has been such a pleasure, is because we love being able to take it off the page,
Yes.
And to experience it with people out there in the world. And so, if you do get a chance to read Youtopia, anyone out there, I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and it is absolutely a fascinating read. Believe me.
Thank you.
Dear listeners. Joseph, thank you so much for joining me. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Dear listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. We'll see you again at Book Lovers Companion. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.